Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. If you'll come in and go ahead and take your seats, we will start our program this evening. If I may ask you, please, to check your cell phones so that won't be a part of the event or the recording of the event here at UNC Asheville. So welcome, each and all of you. So many Ashevilleans and friends of the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina and friends of UNC Asheville. We are pleased to be able to co-host this event with our Community Foundation. Like some of you, I have heard Jim Johnson speak before. I heard him speak at the memorial service for the late Bill Friday. I heard him speak before the UNC Board of Governors, and it is so delightful to be able to bring this talent here this evening to Asheville. In a recent terrific Carolina Alumni Review magazine, Jim Johnson has a quote that I thought sounded so much like the Public Liberal Arts University that I'm going to read you the sentence. He said, about the jobs and careers for the next generation. Quote, "We'll definitely need people with strong analytical skills, people with entrepreneurial acumen, people with contextual intelligence, the ability to use the full power of every smart technology at our disposal and see around corners before we get there, people with impeccable soft skills, and the ability to move through one cultural context to the next. We'll need people with cultural elasticity, people who are agile and flexible, people who can constantly reinvent themselves, who can think creatively." That sounds like the liberal arts in action to me. The kinds of people that Jim Johnson describes are people in this room. I know we are all excited to learn more about his work. I want to thank the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina for bringing him here to UNC Asheville. And now to introduce our speaker for this evening, our friend and leader of our Community Foundation. Please welcome to the podium the president, Elizabeth Braces.
Thank you, Chancellor Ponder. We're pleased that you all are here tonight with us to learn about disruptive demographics from Dr. Jim Johnson. But I first want to thank Chancellor Ponder for both being our co-sponsor and also for her leadership, because as soon as I brought up the idea of bringing Dr. Johnson here, she said, "We're in. We want to partner, so thank you." Last February, 3 of us from the Community Foundation staff heard Jim Johnson speak at the North Carolina Network of Grantmakers annual conference. Dr. Johnson was the keynote speaker on the Friday afternoon at the end of a 3-day conference. Right, this is a difficult time slot. This is a time when people are thinking, how long is it going to take me to get home? Do I need to hear this? And really, do I want another chicken meal? But Dr. Johnson packed the house, as conference attendees either knew of him and his work or had figured out that the information he was going to share should inform their future grant making. In addition to that packed house, he also kept everyone's attention, as he will tonight. During the presentation, it became apparent to all of us from the Community Foundation that the ramifications of Dr. Johnson's research and findings would affect the work of the Foundation and the work of those we support and partner with to enrich lives and communities across Western North Carolina. His presentation was a timely nudge and a not-so-gentle reminder that our region and our state are changing, and that now is the time to think about and plan for the future. Clearly, everyone's work will be most valuable if we all understand the context, the demographic context within which we'll operate in the coming years and decades. Dr. Johnson is the William R. Keenan Jr. Distinguished Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship and the Director of the Urban Investment Strategy Center at the University of North Carolina. He received his PhD from Michigan State University, his Master of Sciences from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and his Bachelor of Sciences from North Carolina Central University. His research interests include community and economic development, the effects of demographic changes on the U.S. workplace, workforce diversity, urban poverty and public policy in urban America. He is a talented demographer who links population trends to the economy, to you, to me, to our grandparents, to our children, and to our collective future. Dr. Johnson's disruptive demographic trends have important implications for business, consumer markets, educational institutions, the philanthropic sector, and the nation's global competitiveness. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and that this evening is the beginning of a conversation about the challenges and opportunities that these trends bring and how we can work together to better serve our region. At the conclusion of the talk, Dr. Johnson will take questions. There will be a microphone placed at the top of this aisle. Please proceed to the microphone to ask your questions, and if there are folks in the overflow room, please come down and make your way to the hall to ask your questions. Thank you for coming, and now, Dr. Jim Johnson.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening. I walked all the way up here from Chapel Hill. The least you all could say, good evening. I'm delighted to be with you this evening to share a few thoughts. I'm grateful to your esteemed chancellor at UNC Asheville and the Community Foundation for having me here. Ladies and gentlemen, the world, but especially this country, every region in this country, and every state in this great nation, including the state of North Carolina, all of those geographical entities are in the midst of an unprecedented demographic transformation. The kinds of changes we find ourselves in the midst of, you're going to have to buckle your seatbelt to cope with them. And if you ignore them at your own peril. They will run you over. There are lots of things you can debate today, politically, economically, and the like. Demography is not one of them. If you're 5 years old today, 5 years from now, you're going to be 10 years old. Comes the same time every year. You just add one to what it was the year before. I've had the good fortune of getting a big raise at the university every year because I go in and meet my dean for my annual review. I tell him, I said, I was 58 last year. I'm 59 this year. It's called forecasting. So the kinds of changes we're talking about today, as was indicated in the introduction, we call them disruptive demographics, and I want to talk with you this evening, engage you in a conversation about what it means for Western North Carolina, the health and competitiveness of your region. I want to talk about what we know about the big trends, where I see both challenges and opportunities for us, and as was indicated, hopefully we can have a fruitful discussion at the end. I'm going to be viewing the disruptive demographics through the lens of the 2010 census and more recent data that have appeared since the 2010 census. How many of you completed your 2010 census form? Don't lie, I got your iris retinal scan, I'll go check. If you remember the form, it was one page, front and back. Depending on the number of crumb snatchers you had in your household, it took between about 10 seconds and about 15 seconds to complete that form. Radically different from earlier censuses because there was something called the census long form. And the emphasis was really on long. You needed breakfast, you needed lunch, you needed dinner, you needed a couple of snacks to complete that thing. They wanted to know about your firstborn, your lastborn, the one you don't own up to. All of your business they wanted to know in the census long form. Well, we don't do that anymore in the decennial census because we have a different way of collecting data today called the American Community Survey. And it is in essence that census long form, but it is administered to a rotating sample of the U.S. population on an annual basis. So we no longer have to wait 10 years to figure out what the big demographic shifts are. And those of us pointy-headed academics who monitor these trends, we can do it on a fairly routine basis. Having said that, the 2010 census did go off without a hitch. On census day, about 75% of the U.S. population responded, and over the next several months, we tracked down people for whom we didn't have correct addresses and the like, and by mid-October of census year, mid to late October, the census was complete. And as many of you may or may not know, the Census Bureau is obligated to deliver to the President of the United States before December 31st of census year something called the reapportionment file. And then the fun begins. We reapportion, we redistrict. And if there's no other reason to complete your form, understand, don't complain politically if you don't complete your census form, because that is the root of all of your representation, of all of the amount of money you get from the federal government, because it's tied to what? Population change and distribution. So, lots of data coming out. I don't think there's anything new there. I think there are 6 big trends that you need to be mindful of. We're going to list them and then talk about them. The first one is the South rises again. The second one is the browning of America. The third one is marrying out is in. The fourth one is the silver tsunami is about to hit. The fifth one, Some of you may have seen the book. It's actually out by Hannah Rosa. She preceded publication of the book, 3 or 4 months ago, maybe 5 months ago, something like that, with 2 articles in Atlantic magazine. Hannah had a period at the end of the sentence. I refuse to put a period at the end of the sentence. So we're going to see if it has any juice here. And my last one is Cooling Water from Grandma's Well and Grandpa's too. Some of you may know the song. It'll become apparent what I mean by all of these in just a moment. Let's talk about what each one of them means and then what it means for your region. When I talk about the South continues to rise again, I'm talking about the Southern United States as defined by the Census Bureau. The states in red on that graphic. I grew up in North Carolina. Had the good fortune of going to school with Marla Adams here. She was the smartest person in the room, and I won't tell you where I was, but it was near the back. We were in the first wave of school desegregation in the South, which means that I attended segregated schools, and she did too, but I read books handed down from the white schools, and sometimes they didn't have nice things written in the margins and the like. And so it was a very interesting time to be in the South. But I couldn't wait to get out of here. And lots of people could not wait to get out of here because the South economically wasn't where it is today. And certainly racially and politically, it was a different place. If you look at the South's history, what you will see is because lots of people, like I did, left the region, from about the turn of the 20th century until 1970, the South only captured about half of net national population growth in this country. And then something profound happened. The South went from the place to leave to being the place to be. In every decade since 1970, the South has captured about half of net national population growth in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, we've gone from a state where we speak 2 languages, English and bad English, to one where we speak over 250 different languages today. Including the first decade of the new millennium, we added 27 million people to our population, a growth rate of about 9.5%. But what you will notice is that of that 27 million people, 14.3 million of them settled in the South at a growth rate of about 14.3%. The national rate of growth, 9.5, 14.3 in the South. And ladies and gentlemen, if the South became the cat's meow demographically, North Carolina became the cat's meow squared because we grew at twice the national average at about 18.5%. And you all weren't very far behind in the West region here, a growth rate of about 10.2%. Greater than the national average, not as rapid as the state, but a profound kind of shift in population change in terms of growth. So the South has become the place to be. What share of net growth? The South captured 53% of net population growth in our country during the first decade of the new millennium. Ladies and gentlemen, what is going on in our country is a profound redistribution of population from the Northeast and the Midwest to what? The West and the South. We actually compute something called the geographic centroid of the U.S. population. Historically, it has been moving progressively from the Midwest to the Southwest. Today, the geographic center of our population is in rural Missouri. I'm predicting it's going to be in Mexico by 2020. Y'all stay tuned to see if I'm right. Why is this going on? It's all about migration, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about immigration. If you look at the period 2000 to 2008, the South was the only region of the country where everybody was moving to in larger numbers than they were leaving. Whether you talk about all migrants, whether you talk about African Americans, whether you talk about Hispanics, the elderly, the foreign-born, everybody headed to the South in larger numbers than were leaving. You can't say that about the West region of the country. Hispanics were leaving in larger numbers, contrary to what you hear in the media and the like. The elderly were leaving in larger numbers. If you move to the Midwest, the only group that were going in the Midwest between 2000 and 2008 in larger numbers than were leaving were the elderly. And this is a news flash. After the coming winter, they're going to be the heck out of there. And the Northeast is kind of like when the last person leaves, please turn off the lights if there's still any on. You can actually see this movement of snowbirds south into North Carolina by paying attention to license tags. Not when you're driving, but when you're in the parking lot, you can actually see this migration and move. A profound redistribution of population, all shifting to and concentrated in the southern United States. But I stopped purposely at 2008 in that graphic because we've had something called the Great Recession. And the question becomes, well, what impact did the Great Recession have on migration and mobility behavior? The answer is a profound slowdown in migration. Didn't change the trajectory or direction of movement, but a profound slowdown in the magnitude of movement. Look, 2004 to 2007, a net gain in the South of about 655,000 people. 2007, 2009, 397,000 slow. Why? Well, the economy went south. 2, we had a housing crisis. When you owe more on your house than it's worth, what impact does it have on your propensity to move? It constrains your ability to move and the like. And look at Florida, ladies and gentlemen. Florida has always been a net importer of people. During the Great Recession, Florida flipped. Why? Well, a lot of those retirees that went there with nice portfolios before the Great Recession, what happened to their retirement portfolios? Went further south. And then we have, I'm going to show you in a minute, that those folks are back in the workplace. They're called the newly unretireds. They're back in the workplace. And then as people aged in Florida to a level where they needed caregiving, what did their caregivers say? We're not coming there. You have to come what? Where we are. And so we're talking about a profound kind of shift. Now, we think that this is temporary. We're actually doing work in Florida right now. We think it's a temporary impact of the Great Recession and the like. But you begin to see how economic cycles impact mobility behavior. We become more draconian on the immigrants. We want to build a wall around our country. And you see the impact here on foreign migration to our state. But I lied to you all. I told you it was the South that was the destination of everybody. It's really not the South, ladies and gentlemen. It's really 4 states in the South. This movement and redistribution trend is about Texas, it's about Florida, it's about Georgia, and North Carolina. Those 4 states captured 71% of that 14.3 million people. The other southern states combined only captured about 29% of that growth. So we're talking about concentrated kind of population change, but we are in the house, in the mix here in North Carolina. So buckle your seatbelts because you haven't seen anything yet. Just like the pattern is highly concentrated and isolated in the region as a whole, if you look at North Carolina, 71% of North Carolina's 1.4 million people added to our population concentrated in the urban crescent from Johnston County along I-40, I-85, all the way down to the great state of Mecklenburg. Okay? Isolated growth down by the beach in New Hanover and New Brunswick County. Ladies and gentlemen, if the growth is concentrated there, somebody's got to be losing population. You see the effect, the east of I-95 effect, and you see some isolated counties, other places. You're only as strong as your weakest link, ladies and gentlemen. But more revealing than this graphic is this one. We got 33 counties in North Carolina in 2009 where the death rate exceeds the birth rate. The only viable business there is undertaker. I saw him the other day. He 89. Who gonna bury him? And so if you look at growth and decline from 2000 to 2010, focus on the western part of the state, you had 1 county that lost population between 2000 and 2010. The rest of them grew. The question becomes, well, what happened after 2010 to 2012, you went from one county with population loss to what? Those red ones. Now, it's 2 years of data, but what does it suggest? We're talking about profound change and growth. You go from one county losing population to a bunch of them. We lost, since 2010, 47 counties in North Carolina lost population. Okay? Now, why and what's driving this loss? To get you to understand how we figure out what drives loss, I've got to give you a little demographic equation. If you want to understand how population changes in a community, you need to, it's a function of people coming in and people leaving. Now, people can come into your community in two ways. They can be born locally, or they can do what? Migrate in. You can lose population by people doing what? Dying or leaving. It's the dynamic interaction of those two things that leads you to understand what is the characteristics of your communities. And you can take this equation and develop this topology. You can have balanced growth communities. In a balanced growth community, you are growing as a function of natural increase, births over deaths, and what? In-migration exceeds out-migration. You can also grow naturally. Births exceed deaths, but more people are leaving than are coming in, but you're still growing because the birth rate is greater than the out-migration rate. Then you can have communities that are migration magnets. What is it? People just flock to your place. You may not be reproducing in a level to replace, but you got people coming in. Then you got three categories that if you're in one of these categories, you're in trouble. You can be a dying community. Why are you dying? Your death rate exceeds your birth rate, and more people leave than are what? Coming in. There's no growth there. Then you can be biologically declining. Your death rate exceeds your birth rate, but you got some migration coming in. And then you can empty out. Everybody leaving, getting out of town. Well, what do y'all look like in the West? You got 3 balanced growth counties, 2 natural growth, 2 migration magnets, no emptying out, dying counties, 13, 5 biologically declining. That's what it looks like. That's for 2000 to 2012. Don't get upset. I did this for somebody in Georgia. The mayor got so upset because his county was dying, he blamed it on me. He wrote to the chancellor and said I ought to be fired. I said, man, this is don't shoot the messenger for the message. So don't get upset if you're here, but this is something to say that demography has an impact on your region, and you got to think about these issues. If you're losing population and the age structure is changing, it has all kinds of implications. We'll come back and talk about that a little later. Now, undergirding the kinds of changes that we're talking about is a profound change and shift in the complexion of our society. What my second trend was about the browning of America. I'm talking about the browning of North Carolina. To get you to understand what I mean by the browning of America, I'm talking about immigration really quickly in a historical kind of context. If you look at this graphic, this is immigration from about 1900 to about 1940. And what you will see from this graphic is that immigration to the U.S. was kept at pretty low levels until around the mid-1960s, and then you see this precipitous increase. Ladies and gentlemen, until the mid-1960s, we had an immigration law in this country that said if we were going to allow the foreign-born to come to America, it was important that they not upset the existing racial and ethnic balance of our country. So we had an express preference for people who were phenotypically similar to Anglo-Saxons, people who could come to America, learn to speak English, sometimes anglicize their names, and this thing called a melting pot was what? Supposed to work. In other words, we operated on a quota system. And that quota system was geographically discriminatory against people from certain regions of the world. You go back to the 1880s, for example, we had something called the Chinese Exclusion Law. They shouldn't be allowed to come to America because it would be, quote unquote, difficult to assimilate into mainstream society. You fast forward to the first decade of the 20th century, we identified something called the Asiatic Barrier Region that included Japan. Shouldn't be allowed to come to America because it would be, quote unquote, difficult to assimilate into mainstream society. Until the mid-1960s, we had a preference for people from Europe, and Western Europe in particular. But something happened around 1965. Coincident with the civil rights movement in domestic life, we liberalized our immigration laws, opening up the doors of our country to people who heretofore had not been allowed to come in very large numbers. We did that via something called the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. This is a profound piece of legislation that is responsible for the diversity of our population as we know it today. That piece of legislation eliminated those discriminatory provisions based on geographic origin, and it's such a profound piece of legislation that we use 1965 as the dividing line to identify two different groups of immigrants in America. Anybody arriving prior to 1965 we called the old immigrants, and the so-called invisible minorities. Why invisible? Phenotypically similar to the Anglo-Saxon model. You get your English thing on, you anglicize your name, it's pretty difficult to distinguish where you're from. Anybody arriving since 1965, we call the new immigrants and the so-called visible minorities. Why visible? They're from geographically different regions of the world, and they're phenotypically different from the Anglo-Saxon model. Yes, they can go through the assimilation process, but you will always know that they're different. Why? Because they are phenotypically different from the Anglo-Saxon model. First thing then, undergirding the browning of America is this fundamental shift in geographic origin, basically a shift from Europe to Asia and Latin America and the Middle East. Secondly, a shift in phenotype, undergirding the shift. Thirdly, you will note that the numbers changed dramatically over that time period. We went from allowing about 206,000 legal immigrants to enter the country annually in that first period, 1920 to about 1960. From 1960 to the early 90s, between 500,000 and about 800,000. And since the mid-2000s, about 1 million to 1.1 million people becoming legal permanent residents of our country, all transforming the complexion of our society. Now, the other piece of it, in 1965, we acknowledged for the first time that we were a nation of immigrants, and we opened the doors of our country to people who were being persecuted for economic, political, or religious reasons, refugees, parolees, and asylees. Depending on the conditions around the world, we opened up our doors, but all of those people contributed to what? The growing diversity of our population. Not much controversy for people who come through legal challenges. It's when we start talking about illegal immigration that people start getting their dandruff up. Now, legal immigration wasn't much of a problem prior to 1965 for two reasons: the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. You ever met anybody try to swim either one of those bodies around? Wasn't much of a problem. But since 1965, where we've had a shift in geographic origins and a contiguous border that has been relatively fluid, since then, this thing called illegal immigration has assumed greater importance. How much? 300,000 to 400,000 people entering the country illegally on an annual basis over the last 2 or 3 decades. But the current controversy about illegal immigration is not new. In the 80s, when I was on the faculty at UCLA in California, there was a lot of discussion at that time. We got too many illegal immigrants in America. We need to do something to stem the tide of illegal immigration. At that time, the federal government says, well, maybe if we saturate labor demand, if we fill every job in our economy, there will be no reason for illegal immigrants to come. How do we propose to do that? There's something called the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. We said at that time to illegal immigrants in America that if you can document that you've been here since 1982, we will grant you amnesty, no questions asked. Well, how do you document that you've been here illegally? Well, if you got a clothing bill, a rent receipt, a greasy receipt from Burger King that says, I was here in 1982, federal government says, I will grant you amnesty, no questions asked. How many people came forward except the federal government's offer of amnesty? About 3 million people, all contributing to the growing diversity of our population. Then understand that they who were granted amnesty could bring family members via the family provision of the immigration law as part of that whole process. So the numbers were bigger than that. But we know that there were about 2.7 million people here illegally who didn't trust the federal government enough to come forward. So, I ain't going for the okie doke, but I'm not going home either. So by October 1996, we estimated that there were about 5 million illegal immigrants in America. And if you follow the debate since 2005, the estimates have ranged anywhere from about 7 or 8 million to about 15 million. Now, as a business demographer, I average 3 to 5 calls a week from the media asking me how many illegal immigrants there are in America. And because I have such high regard for all of you here, I stayed up all night last night figuring. On the plane here today, figuring. I've been figuring ever since, in fact, I got here. So this is hot off the press. Nobody knows this. How many illegal immigrants in America? A lot. The real number is about 11.5 million people, okay? Now, when you all have the discussion or hear the discussion about illegal immigration in America, what group becomes the poster child? Some person of Mexican descent surreptitiously crossing the Rio Grande, right? I want to suggest to you it's a little bit more complicated than that. How many of you are aware that there are a group of immigrants in America called non-immigrants? Non-immigrants. Yes. There are a group of immigrants called non-immigrants. These are people we invite to come to America on a temporary basis. There are 68 different categories of them. They come on visas. International students, tourists, foreign diplomats, and international baseball players. All come on visas. Ladies and gentlemen, if you come on a 90-day tourist visa and you stay 91 days, what are you? No, you're called a visa overstayer. Ladies and gentlemen, 40 to 45% of the illegal immigrants in America walk through the door with papers from the federal government. When it's time to go home, what do? They stay. Remember the terrorists of 9/11? 6 of them had temporary visas that hadn't expired. 3 of them fit the visa overstayer category. When it was time to go home, they did what? They stayed. Another 6, we don't know how the heck they got here. The last one came on a student visa, was supposed to go to California to learn to read and speak English, but instead went to flight school in Florida. We now know after the fact that the flight school was a bit dubious of this guy because he couldn't read and speak English very well. He could speak it well enough to tell them he had no interest in learning how to land planes, only to fly them. Why don't you hear much about this group, folks? Because it's big business for us. But the thing you need to understand is, in the illegal immigration debate, that if you're worried about homeland security, it's probably not the poor Mexican immigrant that's here to work hard and take care of his or her family. It's probably these non-immigrants, because they come from all over the world, folks. No offense, these non-immigrants look a lot like the people in this room. In fact, I don't know who in here is illegal. I'm going to find out before I leave. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we've allowed the illegal immigration debate to be hijacked and to be sidetracked on a single group of people, and it's unfair, and it's just a total misconception of the reality of illegal immigration. Remember I said 40 to 45% of the people walk through the door, so building a wall around the country won't do what? Doodly squat when you walk through the door. And by the way, who's going to build that wall anyway? Y'all will get that one after a while. So who are these immigrants? Who are they? Who are they? About 47% of them are Hispanic. About 25% of them are Asian. That's the browning of America, those groups. Notice that only about 19% were what? Non-Hispanic white. Remember Ellis Island? Those are old immigrants. Now we're talking about immigrant gateways all over the place, including North Carolina being a gateway of people coming in, transforming the complexion of our population. What impact has it had on the composition of our population? If you look at this graphic, you can divide the population into 2 groups. The census does. Hispanics, and then everybody who's non-Hispanic. Anybody who's non-Hispanic, you can unpack by race. They are either white, black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian, or 2 or more races. If you look at that 27 million people we added to our population between 2000 and 2010, 15.2 million of them were Hispanic. A growth rate of about 43%. If you go up and look at the non-Hispanic white population, the non-Hispanic white population grew by 2.2 million, or about 1.2%. Well, if everybody that's not non-Hispanic white is a person of color, where's your growth coming from? If you look at all of those groups of color below non-Hispanic whites, it's almost double-digit growth in everybody. That's the browning of America. Browning of America is about the sources of your growth and where it's going to come from in the future. Look at North Carolina. What drove growth between 1990 and 2007? You had two groups. You had immigrants and Hispanics. Ladies and gentlemen, you take these people out of your population, you got no growth. Got no growth. Look at the takeoff in immigration. Got no growth. I just looked at, I was going to update this, but they shut down the government and they just opened it back up. So I'm going to tell you that number now is at about 750,000. I just saw the latest numbers. I didn't have time to update the graphic, but that's the thing. Profound shift in our population and the like. And if you look at that share, so of that 27 million people, 92% of them were non-white. 55% or 56% of them were Hispanic. You can go down the list and look at what the South, Texas, all those places. In North Carolina, 61% of the net growth of 1.5 million was non-white, 28% of it was Hispanic. That's what I'm talking about, where the growth is going to come and how it's going to change your population. You can unpack North Carolina into 3 county types based on economic characterizations. This is the way the Department of Commerce does it. Tier 1 counties are our poorest counties. Tier 3 counties, that I-85 corridor I showed you earlier in the light, that's the most prosperous counties. And so I told you 61% of net growth for the state as a whole. In those poorest counties, 81% of the growth was non-white and 52% of it was Hispanic. Tier 2, you see the numbers. In most prosperous counties, 59% of the growth was non-white, 25% of it Hispanic. Out west here, 43% of your growth was among non-whites and about 30% of it was among Hispanics. Give you some sense of the rate of change. Here in western North Carolina, you had a net growth of about 128,000 people, 10% growth rate. Your white population grew by about 57%. Your Hispanic population grew by about 29%. You're still a migration magnet for non-Hispanic whites and the like, but you have rapid growth among Hispanics in terms of the kinds of changes that we're talking about. You're headed in the direction. You're not there yet like the state, but just buckle your seatbelt. It's just a matter of time when all of this change is going to come here. Now, also driving this browning of America that we talk about is a profound change in marriage patterns in this country. As you know, until the mid-1960s, it was even illegal for blacks and whites to marry in the United States. We eliminated all of that we had these anti-miscegenation laws and all of that. We got rid of that. But this marrying out is about a more pervasive pattern of out-marriage than what we're talking about in just terms of blacks and whites. Ladies and gentlemen, the out-marriage rate among newly married couples doubled between 1980 and 2008, from about 7% of all marriages to about 15% of all marriages. And among currently married people, the out-marriage rate went from 3.2% to about 8% of marriages. Well, who is doing all this hooking up in surreptitious ways here? About 41% of those marriages are between Hispanics and whites. About 15% of those marriages are between Asians and whites. And in about 16% of the cases, both parties are non-white, Asians and blacks, blacks and Hispanics. All right. And then we got this group of other, I don't know who the heck they are, but they're hooking up. Hooking up. Only about 11% of it is the traditional what? Black-white. What does this mean, ladies and gentlemen? It means a profound change in the composition of the school-age population, and it means that the nice and neat little crucibles that we used to put people in won't fit in the future. The second most rapidly growing population behind Hispanics during the first decade of the new millennium were people of 2 or more races. There was a 1.5 million increase in that population in this country. And so it has all kinds of implications for our society in the future. That's the out-marriage pattern in North Carolina. If you can figure it out, be my guest. It's a profound kind of change that we have. Basically, what it shows is that the out-marriage rates are highest among Asian women and Hispanic women in North Carolina. But the mix is going to change dramatically, the complexion further browning our population. Now, ladies and gentlemen, all of this is very, very important for us because migration and immigration are age-selective processes. What does that mean? It means far more young people migrate and immigrate than older people. That means old people don't move, they move slower and at a lower propensity than what? Young people. And then you have to understand there's one more part of that story is that, in fact, I'm going to deny that I said this before I say it because I could get in trouble. In fact, y'all don't repeat this anywhere because you could get in trouble too. Young people are more likely to have children than old folk. You put those two things together, age selectivity of people coming in and higher fertility among young people, it has an impact on your age structure and your fertility rate. Let's look at it. Look at the median age in North Carolina of a female in 2009, 38 years old, okay? Half of females older than that, half of them younger than that. Go down and tell me what the median age of a Hispanic female in North Carolina is. 22. Now, how many of y'all heard in the illegal immigration debate that Hispanics are a burden on the healthcare system? Ever heard that? What kind of major health problem do you have when you're 22? Now, before you answer that, somebody tell me what the median age of a white, non-Hispanic female is in America up there. 40. My teacher told me after 0.5, you round up. 42, right? Ladies and gentlemen, ladies, let me tell y'all something. There's something in demography called completed fertility. It's when you tell your boo, go take out the trash. Ain't nothing else happening here. Completed fertility occurs between the ages of 40 and 44. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, look. What you will notice is that the women of color are between 10 and 20 years younger than the non-Hispanic white female. Where's your growth going to come from? The median age female, 56 live births per 1,000 women. Hispanic females, 101 live births per 1,000 women. Now, some of y'all might say, I'm going home and fix this tonight. I say, go ahead. Leave now. At every stoplight, let it cycle through 3 or 4 times. Get as much rest as you can. You might go home and squeeze out one, but you're not going to squeeze out a difference between 49 and 101. See, ladies and gentlemen, if you shut down your border and try to keep people out, where's your growth going to come from? We're an aging population. We're an aging population. You have to understand. That's why this is important. That's why you cannot take the immigration debate lightly, because if you're aging out of the childbearing years, where do you get growth from? If you can't reproduce it, you got to do what? Import it. Plain and simple. This is biology, it's not sociology. We can see the impact in our society already. In 1990, 66% of all births in America were to non-Hispanic whites. That percentage had dropped to 50% by 2008, and for the first time in history, in July of 2011, non-Hispanic white births were no longer the numerical majority in America. And it's unlikely to change. Why? We've aged out. We're aging out. We can't afford to be anti-immigrant. Somebody's got to pay the bills. Somebody's got to pay the bills. Look at the impact on our school system. In between 2000 and 2009, our enrollment in our public schools grew by about 160,000 kids, okay? A growth rate of about 12.6%. Of that 160,000 kids, 96,000 of them were Latino or Hispanic. The second largest group were what? Black. Note that the non-Hispanic white kids declined. Now, some of that is because non-Hispanic whites are sending their kids to what? Private school. But a lot of it is just what? Declining fertility. See, ladies and gentlemen, there's something called the total fertility rate. It's the number of kids you need to have to replace yourself. in a statistical sense, you need to have 2.1 kids to replace yourself as a couple. Don't ask me about the 0.1, you just got to be rocking and rolling, okay? The non-Hispanic white total fertility rate in America has been 1.9 for 2 decades. What does that mean? The average non-Hispanic white family has 1.9 kids. Now, I don't know how you get 0.9 of a kid. I taught a few of them at Carolina. But you need 2.1 kids. If you're not having you're not replacing yourself, ladies and gentlemen. And why is that the case? It's because we're aging out. We're aging out. I understand that. So we see the implications in our school system. Now, some people take that growth in the Hispanic population and say, see, they're a burden on our healthcare education system. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be crazy. Fast forward. Who's going to pay for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid? You've already paid in, but isn't it a pay-as-you-go system? Which means there's no guarantee that you get anything out of it unless somebody's doing what? Working. Even a poor boy from Falkland, North Carolina knows that. Now, it's really important because the silver tsunami is about to hit. This is even more important. Now, Browning is about immigrants and people of color change the complexion of society. The silver tsunami is about the graying of America, okay? About the aging of our native-born population. Now, you might ask the question, well, how do I know if I'm part of the graying of America? There are four ways, 4 litmus tests. Number 1, if you have difficulty seeing this screen, you're part of the graying of America. Number 2, if you got to go to the restroom 3 times during this presentation, you're part of the graying of America. Number 3, if you fall asleep, you're just an old codger. It ain't my fault. You're part of the graying of America. Seriously, show of hands. Number of people born in 1945 or earlier. Look around. Pre-boomers, okay? How about 1946 to 1964? Look around. Boomers. Everybody that got their, keep them up. Everybody that got their hand up is part of the post-World War II hormonal rush in America. Our fathers went off to World War II and came back home and got busy. Got busy to the tune of producing 80 million of us. On January 1st of 2011, we're called the baby boom generation. The first baby boomer born in America turned 65 and became eligible for what? Everything. Ladies and gentlemen, that 80 million of us who are boomers are turning 65 to the tune of 8,000 per day, and that will occur every day, 365 days of the year for the next 20 years. It's the pig in the python moving out. Now, 1965 to 1980, Gen X, fewer hands. 1980 to 2000, Gen Y, okay? If Gen X and Gen Y got to pay for Social Security, y'all in deep trouble. I don't know any other way to put it. You're in deep trouble. Let's look at it. Let's look at it. Those of us who are boomers were 45 to 64 in 2009. There were 79 million of us. That population grew by about 17 million, a growth rate of 27% during the first decade of the new millennium. What you will notice is that the second most rapidly growing population is the 65-plus population. We're talking about aging of a boomer cohort, and we're talking about enhanced and increased longevity. The average 65-year-old turning 65 today is going to live another 18.7 years. And we now think living to 100 on a routine basis is well within reach. Why? Y'all are taking better care of yourselves. How many of y'all heard about this thing about 60 is the new 30? Huh? Y'all seen it on TV, these 60-year-old women with yellow spandex on Twitch and telling me 60 is the new 30. Let me tell you, 60 is 60. But what is that about? It's really about being more active, active living, active eating, and all of that, right? It's about taking care of yourself. Now we got something called regenerative medicine. We got a scientist at Wake Forest that regenerated a bladder. Your bladder wear out, we'll sell you another one. You just tell me what color you want. And there's one school of thought that says living to 130 on a routine basis is well within reach. But look, ladies and gentlemen, we got one problem. Look at the 25 to 44-year-old population. What happened to it? It declined. It declined. Now, some of that is baby bust, but a lot of it is the kinds of debilitating diseases that beset us boomers and pre-boomers later in life are now besetting Gen X and Gen Y earlier in life, leading to the early onset of what? Disability and death. Those are the folk that got to be paying into what? Everything. Everything. We don't get it, folk. We don't get it. We are an aging society. You need young talent to do what? Prepare and to pay the bills. That's how often we're aging. I didn't want to show y'all this. Y'all might run off and jump off the first floor. I ain't doing it. This is pre-boomers and boomers and Gen X in Asheville. Y'all doing okay. You got some growth in your younger population. You're actually losing some boomers, but your pre-boomers are growing. But, don't take it lightly because there's something called a dependency rate. It's the number of people in your community who don't work either because they're too young or too old, divided by the number of people who do work, okay? They are mapped here. If you're in a dark brown county on this map, you're in deep, deep trouble because you got far more dependents than you do workers. Your dependency rate exceeds 100. You can't sustain yourself where you got more dependents than you do what? Workers. Look at our counties here. I've done tier 3, tier 1, tier county. Look at the population change by age. Let's look at tier 1 counties out here. What population age group are they losing? Under 25 and 25 to 44. We need them. And if you look at tier 2, they're losing 25 to 44. But even in our most prosperous county, we're not growing as rapidly in those groups that you need to grow to what? To have somebody to have a viable and sustainable safety net that enables us to sustain our local communities and to pay into the system of safety net programs that matter for us. Anybody from Alabama in here? Okay. Don't get mad. Don't get mad. Alabama doesn't like immigrants. In fact, they locked up the CEO of Mercedes-Benz. He forgot his wallet or something, was driving to their plant, and the police officer arrested him because he looked like an immigrant. And the police officer, I heard, was driving a Mercedes SUV. Look at Alabama got 5 counties with a dependency rate of 152.5. 152 dependents for every 100 workers. They need to be doing the Tom Bodett or Motel 6 thing, standing on the freeway with a sign saying, y'all come, we gonna leave the light on for you. You cannot sustain yourself with that. That's us. Those red counties got a dependency rate of greater than 100. Even if you in the blue counties, that's 70 to 99, because the denominator is just say you work. It doesn't say you work full time. It doesn't say you work part time. But we know there's increasing what? Part time work. So you can't even take comfort in that. This is y'all out west. You got 4 counties with a dependency rate of 70 or less. You got 3 over here with a dependency rate of 100 or more. And then you got a bunch of them all in between. But ladies and gentlemen, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Okay? Got to understand it. Got to understand it. See, ladies and gentlemen, this aging thing is no joke. In fact, it's a global phenomenon. It's not just us. In Japan last year, they sold more adult diapers than they did baby diapers. No? How do you sustain yourself and keep things going when you got these dependency rates? How do you do it? All right. Cooling water from Grandma's well. How many of y'all know the song? I'm not going to ask you to sing it. Good. This trend is about the most rapidly growing household type of the first decade of the new millennium. That song, by the way, is a black religious song. This is about grandparents raising grandchildren. Okay? Look at it. All households with kids grew by about 3.8% between 2001 and 2010. No grandparent households, meaning the husband and wife with their kids, grew by what? 1.4%. Grandparents, both of them present, raising grandchildren, grew by what? 42. Grandmother only raising grandchildren grew by 9.3, and grandfather only raising grandchildren grew by what? 29%. Now, most of you all are thinking, if you're like me, you think about your grandma and my grandma. My grandma was 97 when she died, which means she had an AARP card when I was born. Okay? About half of these grandparents are between the ages of 30 and 50. Okay? What does that mean? It means that one of your workers, 31 years old, could walk up to you and say, I need time off this afternoon to go to school to check on my what? Grandchild. And it will be real. It will be real. Now, there are some grandmothers like yours and mine. 89 years old, on second or third, fourth tour of duty of child rearing, can't get out of the rocking chair, and the 14-year-old out with the car cruising, looking for a 30-year-old man. I didn't make that one up. That happened in my own family. I was pretty close to having stripes to go a different direction. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, 3 things you got to understand about this aging and this changing family structures. First of all, there's a huge succession problem in organizations. You got all the people that raise their hands, sooner or later going to be out of the workplace, right? Got to think about how do you replace them. Number 2, for the first time in history, we're going to have 4 generations in the workplace. Everybody from the pre-boomer, who's most familiar and in love with the rotary dial phone, to Gen Y that waltzes in at 10:30 in the morning with 2 buds in the ear whistling. And all you boomers who've been at work since 4:30 in the morning, because that's the way we roll. And when the Gen Y waltzes in at 10:30, the boomer looks at him and says, look, that's a bad work ethic. And the Gen Y just takes those 2 buds out just long enough to say, you can't spell work ethic because I finished the first 10 seconds I walked in here, what you've been navel-gazing at since 4:30 this morning. And my friend, pre-boomer, still trying to get that first rotary dial call out for the day. And somebody's got to manage all of that. All of that. We have to build far more agile and flexible organizations in the future. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason we have to build more flexible organizations is because this age and these demographic shifts are going to usher in a profound shift in the meaning and role of work in society. Right now, work organizes our lives. If you kind of think about it, when you decide to take vacation and all the kind of stuff, work is the organizing principle. In the future, life will organize work. And the reason life will organize work for most of us is because child care won't be the issue for the majority of us. It will be elder care. And elder care is radically different from child care. Child care is pretty routinized. You drop your crumb snatch off at the daycare in the morning. You go back and pick them up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You may go at lunchtime if they do something they ain't got no business, but it's pretty routinized. But elder care is anytime, any place, 365. You will have to figure out, have to squeeze work in if you have elder care responsibilities, particularly if you have a loved one with what? Dementia or Alzheimer's. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not building organizations to accommodate what? Life. But we're on the cusp of a profound change. And the more diverse our population becomes, the more this becomes important. In my own family, until last year in February, we had 8 family members between the ages of 84 and 97 that my siblings and I were taking care of. Some days I was scared to pick up the phone. And no offense, but you seniors lie through your teeth. Don't tell the truth. You call them, you ask them how you doing. Oh, the sun's shining outside. I just got out of my Mercedes and I turned on my DVD and I had a steak sandwich. You go down there, the roof off, the phone's off, everything. Why? Because they're proud people. It becomes a full-time job to do what? Caregiving is not something that you do what? Take lightly. What's happened to the economy? You got to work. You got to do all of this. And now you got what? Grandkids to take care of. And not only may you have grandkids to take care of, in some of these households, not only are the grandchildren there, but one or more of the biological parents may be there also. Why? Because in an economic downturn, when you lose your house, where do you go? Go home. Talking about a profound change. And then, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chancellor, you got households like this, and you base income and qualifications to get a scholarship or aid on household size and household income. There may be 22 people in the house, and nobody can do what? Qualify for any kind of what? Assistance. Because we don't understand the dynamic. Don't understand the dynamic. That's the numbers for North Carolina. It's growing like crazy. I know y'all saying by now, what in the world do we come listen to this guy for? Good news first. Good news first. Women are about to surpass men as the numerical majority in the paid workforce in America. The operative term is paid workforce, okay? Women have been working all their lives. In 2010, women constituted 49.8% of the paid workforce. That's the good news. But ladies, as you know, this is not because we've decided to treat you all fairly. Wage gap is still pretty what? Wide. Rather, this statistic is a function of men doing so poorly in American society today. Look at it. Look at the Great Recession. 80% of job loss in the Great Recession among men. Some people call it a man-cession. But it grows deeper than that. Look at it. Today, 3 times as many men of working age do not work at all compared to 1969. They don't work. Why? Skills mismatches. They don't have the skills to do what? Adjust to a new economy. Disabilities or incarceration. The percentage of prime working age men receiving disability insurance doubled between 1970 and 2009. Since 1969, the median wage of the American male has declined by about $13,000 after accounting for inflation. But most telling, After peaking in 1977, male college completion rates have barely changed in 35 years. Where are the men? Where are the boys? So ladies, the good news is y'all doing well. Bad news is if you ain't hitched, forget about it. Ain't enough eligible, marriageable males to go around. What's eligible, marriageable? Comparable education and with a J-O what? B. I gave this talk in Atlanta a couple weeks ago. When I got to this point, a lady stood up in the back and said, "You drove all the way down here to tell me that I've been living it for 20 years. Don't shoot the messenger for the message." Look at it. In 2010, we granted 572,000 more degrees to women than we did men in higher education. The sex ratio in higher education has been 60% female, 40% male for a decade. Where are the men? See, ladies and gentlemen, with those kind of numbers, you can't have stable families and stable communities. You just can't. These are our community college rates, about 40% male. This is a UNC system, 44% male system as a whole. Majority serving institutions, about 46% male. Our minority serving institutions, Pembroke plus all the black schools, 38% male. Our historically black colleges, 37% male. We had one a couple years ago that was 80-20. 80% female, 20% male. I don't know why it wasn't that way when I was going to school. Sound pretty good to me. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. Think about it for a moment. Think about that. And it starts early. Look at that gender gap. These are a set of schools we're working with right now. Look at the gender gap, 8th grade math, boys, girls. Look at reading. Look at Algebra 1, one of the biggest predictors of college success. Look at end of course, composite score there. Gender gap. Boys are not even in the room to take the test. Not even there. So it shouldn't be a surprise that you get that kind of gap in the what? Graduation rate. And it's really about boys of color. It's really about boys of color. Look at it. 3rd grade reading. White boys at the top, and then the boys of color, blacks, Latino, and American Indian below. That's 3rd grade reading. That's 3rd grade math. That's 8th grade reading. That's 8th grade math. I know y'all heard this thing about people looking at those 3rd grade scores and using them to project future needs for prison beds and the like. So, lots of diversity out there. That's a good thing. But we got some serious challenges, folks. And here's the biggest one for me. This is a racial typology of U.S. counties. The red counties on this map are racial generation gap counties. In these counties, the adult voting age population are predominantly white, aging empty nesters, but the school age population is predominantly minority. What kind of support for public education you think you get there? That's the ain't got no dog in the fight crowd. My kids are out of school. I'm worried about what? Crime and retirement amenities and the like. The gold counties on this map are minority-majority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly minority, school age population predominantly minority. Lots of interest in public education. What's missing? No money there. They're all low-wealth counties. Majority of the counties on this map, that white space, are majority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly white, and the school age population is predominantly white. In these school districts, about 1/3 of the kids are kids of color. But if you peer beneath the veneer, what you will find is those kids of color are in two states, two conditions. They're either attending under-resourced, racially isolated schools within those districts, or within the good schools, they're on the what? Non-academic prep track. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the new majority in America, kids of color, who should be able to propel our nation in the years ahead, are between a rock and a hard place through no fault of their own. Our schools today are more segregated than they were in 1954, the year I was born, and the year of Brown versus the Board of Education. You cannot sustain yourself with this. We cannot compete globally with what? That. And so when you're at your book clubs and the like, and people tell you they have no dog in the K-12 fight, tell them, yes, they do. It's called the future competitiveness of our nation. These are the folk who have to sustain Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. You leave them uneducated, you got a slight problem on your hands. It's got a slight problem. Look at this number. And here's the magnitude of the problem. We just finished this study. This is a school system that will remain nameless, but they produce about 6,000 graduates every year, a public school system. Of that 6,000 graduates, about somewhere between 1,000 and up to about 1,700 of them go to the local community college every year. Of that 1,000 to 1,700 students, 71% of those kids can't pass developmental level math 1. That's adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Only 7% of the 71% ever make it to the starting line of math, college math. We can't compete that way. Can't compete. Madam Chancellor got no customers with that number. You need somebody that can qualify for what? Admissions. We need to understand that. And even if you get that right, I think we're in a situation today and an economy that are writing a new set of rules. Let's look at it. Let's look at 3 recessions. 1990 to 93, 2001, 2004. I'm going to show you the 3rd recession in just a moment. Consider this. In those 2 recessions, long-term joblessness, defined as being unemployed 6 months or longer, increases more rapidly among people with some college, a bachelor's degree or higher than it does among people with a high school diploma or less. Can I say that again? Long-term joblessness, defined as being unemployed 6 months or longer, increases more rapidly among people with some college, a bachelor's degree, or higher than it does among people with a high school diploma or less. My grandmama had a 3rd grade education, but she wasn't no fool. Whenever she heard statistics like that, she said, that's bass backwards. It ain't supposed to be that way. Didn't somebody say that if you go to school, get good grades, graduate, and stay out of trouble with the law, life was going to be what? Good. See, ladies and gentlemen, our economy is no longer adversely impacting just blue-collar workers. It's no longer just the blue-collar Joe or Jane who falls on hard times. We're in a white-collar recession now. And we've been in white-collar recessions for the last 3. You can see it there. But this is even more telling. Let's look at the long-term unemployed during the Great Recession. These are 5 professions, architects and engineers up there. What that says is of the architects and engineers who were jobless in 2009, 41% of them were unemployed 6 months or longer. Okay? Now, y'all heard a lot about STEM education, right? If I hear something else about STEM, I'm going to grow one. If we need so many engineers, why are the ones that we got unemployed 6 months or longer? Because they're competing in a global marketplace. If you don't believe it, Google the John F. Welch Technology Center in Bangalore, India. It's an R&D facility for General Electric, one of the most revered companies in the world. what you'll see is 4,000 postgraduate trained scientists and engineers, all of whom graduated from the equivalent of MIT in this country, the Indian Institute of Technology. Center opened in 2000 or 2001. First year they applied for 120 patents. The 4,000 scientists and engineers earn on average $650 a month. How do you compete with that? How do you compete with that? It's a new day, folks. It's a new day. Look at our bachelor's degree holders under 25 who were jobless or underemployed. 2041% of them were. 2011, 54% of them were. And if you look at poverty, same thing like joblessness, increases more rapidly among people with some college or bachelor's degree or higher than it does among people with a high school diploma or less. This recession is sending shock waves in ways that we have not in the past had to what? Encounter. And when do you get a good start on your retirement package? Early in what? Life. So we think people need something else, as Madam Chancellor pointed out, the quote that I had, you're going to need something else in your toolkit. Having a degree is necessary, but it's not sufficient in this economy. Because the only constant is change, and the new normal is about uncertainty, insecurity, and turbulence. And you need something else in your toolkit, and our kids need something else in their toolkits to thrive and prosper. You got to have those analytical reasoning skills. But in this economy, entrepreneurial acumen is of prime importance. When one door shuts in your face, you got to be able to do what? Cut another one. Okay? You're going to need contextual intelligence. As the chancellor pointed out, I say you got to be able to see around that corner well before you get there. Got to be able to peer through the fog and see where the opportunities and the challenges are. And how do you acquire contextual intelligence? You become a master of smart technology. Right now, our kids use smart technology to do really dumb things. We got to transform that to comparative advantage. See, there's nothing that happens in the world and in society that there aren't some signals in the marketplace that is what? Happening. Your challenge is to be the master of information management so you don't get blindsided by what? Unanticipated change. I'm old school. I'm a Google alert junkie myself. So the things that I sell myself in the marketplace as being an expert on, I get Google alerts about 6 times a day. So if you want to debate me on immigration reform, bring it on. Okay? Little word to the wise. Y'all got CVS drugstore here? Stop there. Get you some Band-Aids, a tourniquet, and if they sell dentures, go down the aisle and get you some of them too. Because I'm going to beat you within a half inch of your life. Because that's the business that I'm in. If I don't stay on top of my information game, I'm not in business in an information what? Economy. Contextual intelligence is about staying on top of your information game to understand where there's opportunities and what? Landmines to be navigated. That's what you have to do. And everybody needs soft skills and cultural elasticity. 2 skills matter in the new economy for our kids. Your hard skills will get you an interview. Years of school completed, performance on standardized tests, prior work experience, and all of that. Those are hard things. Those are quantifiable things. They will get you an interview, and your soft skills will get you booted out the door or lack of them. And when we deal with poor kids, we always deal with them with a deficit model, a kind of everything is wrong with you and I'm going to fix it model, ladies and gentlemen. We have to stop that foolishness. You know the reason why? Because there's something called the code of the streets out there that says the way I look, the way I talk, the way I dress can mean the difference between what? Success and failure on the street. Likewise, those same rules apply walking into the what? Suites. The way I look, the way I talk, the way I dress can mean the difference between getting a scholarship and not getting one. It's not one or the other, ladies and gentlemen. It's having the cultural elasticity to move from what? The streets to the suites without what? Missing a beat. All of y'all are well-educated, smart, bright-looking people. I could drop you off on a street corner, you'd be dumb as nails. Why? You don't understand what? The code of the streets. Likewise, I could bring some kids in here and they interview for a scholarship. They don't understand the code of the suites. This is a global characteristic, ladies and gentlemen. You can't go to Bangkok, Thailand and do business the way you do business in America. You got to have the what? Cultural elasticity to move. Those are universal kinds of skills, and we got to understand. So when that kid walks in and have walked through 3 rival gang territories to get to school that day, we call that strategy at Keenan Flagler. You'd be so dumb, walk through 3 rival gang territories and end up with The Undertaker. My challenge with that kid when he walks in and says, "You that smart, help me work this word problem over here." It's all about perspective, folk, and understanding that it's a real complex kind of thing. So what do we got to do? We got to manage this transition from the graying to the browning of America. It won't be easy, but we got to do it as a competitive issue. Our competitiveness in the global marketplace hinges on getting this right. I don't know what your politics is, ladies and gentlemen, but we got to embrace them because we need them. We need the talent. Somebody's got to pay the bills. And you got to understand that we got to figure out how to build far more agile and robust organizations to accommodate the diversity that exists out there and to accommodate life. And I quite frankly don't know, if you don't become actively engaged in K-12 education or up the ante, how we're going to compete, thrive, and prosper in the years ahead across the state, across the nation. We got to foster and facilitate successful aging in place as a form of enlightened self-interest. Ladies and gentlemen, we got to keep people out of skilled nursing facilities. They're costly and they will bankrupt you. Seniors falling in their homes and breaking body parts is a $35 billion a year problem, projected to grow to $55 billion by 2020. If you don't think that'll bankrupt you, think again. We got to do everything we can do to keep people successfully aging in place. Expand those fall prevention programs, promote healthy eating by design, active living by design, and you got to audit existing facilities to ensure equal opportunity of access across the life course and build new facilities according to universal design principles and standards. Ladies and gentlemen, everything has to change as a function of an aging population. A doorknob can become a lethal weapon to a senior with arthritis. If a fire breaks out in your house and you're arthritic, it might as well be a what? 9mm gun to your head. Every house will have to have at least one entryway with 0 step grade. If you've been in a newly constructed house lately, what you will notice is that microwave ovens are no longer here. At iLink, where are they? Here, drop out and do what? Pull out and drop in. If you've been in a CVS grocery store, you might notice that they have dropped the heights of shelves by about 7 inches to accommodate an aging population. And how many of you realize that AT&T is in the shoe business now? The phone company. AT&T's got something called a smart shoe and a smart slipper. It's a shoe that has sensors in it. You can monitor your loved one's behavior on your cell phone. Now, different from Life Alert. When do you use Life Alert? After you've fallen. Now you can monitor your loved one's behavior before something what? Happens. And we have pill bottles with sensors in them that will alert your loved ones when they should take their medicine And if they haven't done it within a specified length of time, you get a text message or an email say, Grandma ain't taking the medicine. And then you call Grandma and say, Grandma, you remember when you used to whoop me within an inch of my life? It's payback time. All of these things, ladies and gentlemen, we have to deal with in the future. But the biggest one for me is about how do we ensure that the next generation of kids have access to a high-quality education so that they can help us sustain the American dream in this country. I appreciate the time to be with you today. Thank you. Thank you. Sure.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Johnson. I have 2 questions. You never answered the question of where are all the men?
You didn't pay me to tell you that.
You never said.
Yes, I did. I said incarcerated.
Oh, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's on the graphic up there.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
good question. The big thing, ladies and gentlemen, is the number of men that are disabled today. How many wars have we fought in the last 20 years? The mental health crisis in America is unbelievable. Look in your jails, look at disability statistics and things of that nature, and look at unemployment statistics and things of that nature. You get a lot of it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My second question is, you talked so much about the importance of educating a young population so that they can sustain us. And I am wondering, the most intelligent people in our society, or they claim to be, are pricing young people out of the education market at a time when you're talking about how important it is for them to get an education. And the second part of that is we seem to be militarizing our law enforcement agencies to, I believe, control those people who are uneducated and unemployed. And I'm wondering how you explain that seemingly dumb decision to do that.
Gee, y'all. All of that has an element of truth to it, but I think the education marketplace is changing. I think we're on the cusp of a revolution in education. I mean, if you look at the kinds of trends, there's one school of thought that says that there may be 6 traditional universities as we know them today by 2020, meaning people sitting around with tweed jackets on, thinking and cogitating and the like. Seriously, you think about these MOOCs, massive open online courses, one that stand for what, 240,000 people in one class? And so we have to we can't, you're right. I mean, the affordability and access questions are dramatic issues. And we keep raising tuition, and that's a model, and that's a horse and dog that won't continue to hunt. We have to think about building a far more agile and flexible education system. And I think we have to look at blended models of education and the like to ensure equal opportunity of access. I don't have any massive answer, and I don't think it's productive to debate the value of one kind of education or the other. We need to fix it and figure out how to make it work. As smart as we ought to be able to solve this problem, but stop burying our heads in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist. And until we look at the demography and see that we can't afford to just ignore it, I think that to me, that's the big issue. I think there are creative ways of doing it. We've built our own school in Durham, North Carolina for vulnerable kids. We developed our own model. We raised $10 million to make it happen. We do it every day. And so I think that until we understand the urgency of the matter, I think we will have all of these problems and we will continue. I don't think, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that the get tough on crime policies of the past will continue. And the reason they won't continue is the same reason that we're here. All of those people that we locked up for 20 and 30 years are aging in there. Who's going to pay for them? Well, you know what they're going to do with them? Release them right back to the street. And so we're going to see some changes, and they won't be good, some of them, but we got to get people to understand the realities of an aging society on the one hand and the need to educate and invest in young people on the other in order to maintain our regain our competitive edge in the marketplace. I just think it's a strategy and an argument about why this is important for me. Yes, sir.
Good evening, sir. Maceo Keeling, Asheville Business Accelerators. We look at the aging population and the young people in 4 generations in the workplace. That presents its own set of problems for healthcare, et cetera. How do we manage optimizing health benefits within the workplace across those 4 generations and without bankrupting the very business that we're trying to get into?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think the elder care economy affords us a huge opportunity for job creation and community development and the like, number one. Number two, I think that there are all kinds of ways to incent people to be active, to engage in active living by design, healthy eating by design, and all those kinds of things. I think incentives are much better than, the carrot is much better than the stick, and I think that there are some trends out there that are going on in that way. The most powerful answer to that question is to look at the companies that are doing it right, that have built far more agile and flexible organizations. We've begun to rank companies on this, and fortunately enough, we have the #1 company probably in the United States, maybe even in the world, here in North Carolina. If you ever meet a person in this company, left this company, say they're going to work for something, don't hire them. Something wrong with them. I'm talking about SAS. You know, if you sitting at your desk at a conundrum at SAS, they tell you what? Go get on your bicycle, go for a ride, clear your head. You worried about your crumb snatcher? They say, flip on the computer, go check. The daycare is right across there. Better yet, take a break and go walk and check on your kid. In the depths of the recession, they hire 500 people and say they can't find enough workers. Why? They built a company and an organizational culture to accommodate what? Life. You can't think straight when you're worried about where your grandmama got up that morning or whether your kid got on the what? Bus that morning. Because we got constipated managers who insist that you punch the clock at a certain time. What kind of productivity is going on if you don't know where your loved ones are? Doesn't make any sense. So I think we know something about these things, and we've begun to do it in some of the companies and organizations that if we build on those models. Yes.
Yes, thank you for coming
Yes, sir.
out today.
Thank you, sir.
Right. I wanted to ask your reflections on the middle class income earnings. You know, looking at the demographic trends, aging out, 4 generations working, education, and the whole shrinking of the middle class theme that's going on in America. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, the way the economy has restructured those jobs that enabled middle class and working class people to form and maintain stable employment, those good paying jobs are no longer there. We're in an economy today that is characterized by contingent work, part-time, contract work, and things of that nature. In fact, I've argued that all of us are going to be freelancers and free agents in the marketplace in the future. But part of that wiping out of the middle has to do with the disappearance of those jobs. Now, fortunately, and much of it was in the manufacturing sector, fortunately, we're on a rebound in manufacturing. The problem is, when you talk about advanced manufacturing, it's not your father's and your grandfather's manufacturing. It's about robots and the ability to do, you're right, head work as opposed to hand work. We got robots now that see better than humans. And we say that every robot probably replaces about 40 workers. Well, the robot works every shift, so that robot actually replaces how many workers? 120 workers. And so productivity enhances, technology enhances, all of that is in that mix of wiping out, the middle class. So we have to, but I do think that we have a unique opportunity to pursue an entrepreneurial economy. We've never taken a backseat to anybody, but the problem is we have an education system, particularly public education system, that suppresses and depresses creativity. Our school system puts us in a box, and when you don't fit, what do we say? You got attention deficit disorder. Creative kids, by definition, have what? Attention deficit disorder. We need more of that. We need to create a society, an economy, and a school system that allows kids to think crazy thoughts. 9 out of 10 of them may be bona fide crazy, but one of them may be what? The revolution that transforms society. And so I think if we unleash the sheer talent that we have, I teach in the prison system. I teach a course, and you want to see real ingenuity, creativity? Teach in the prison system. They ended up in there because they're what? Entrepreneurial. We got to figure out how to take that from the underground economy to what? The above ground economy. I really think it's there, but we haven't gotten there to figuring out how to make it happen. And so now in the meantime, we gotta. I still think making the demographic case for why all of this is important. Wiping, how the middle class going to be taken care of if we don't invest in these young people who got to do what? Continue to pay and propel the nation. Somebody got to be paying taxes to do something. You can't just cut taxes and expect this to happen. You got to do what? Invest, and we got to invest in our economy and our society and our competitiveness. So I don't see any other way to do it. I really don't. Yes, sir.
This is not a pro-choice or pro-life question, but could you comment on the demographic effects of abortion?
Don't know how to measure it, and don't know how you distinguish it from traditional family planning, and don't know where you get the statistics. Because in my community, girls went off to camp magically for 3 or 4 weeks and came back home. Where did that get recorded? I think more of the decline in fertility is about 2 things. One, the increasing role of women in the workplace and careers. What happens when you are a female and you get your career together? What happens to the age at marriage and the age at birth for first child? It goes up. And some women choose not to have kids, what? At all. So the longer you get your career together, you're shrinking the number of years it's likely to have children. And I think that's the big thing that's depressing fertility. I get that question often, and I'm challenged by it because I want to know where people get the statistics from. It's pretty hard to come up with. Last question, they said, ma'am, it's not me.
Oh, it better be
I'll
good.
sit here and answer your question all night long. She said it over here.
Well, it's interesting the way you describe how the workplace will be with so many generations working together. I had that conversation with my son. And I said, people my age, we don't have enough to retire, so we're struggling to hang on to our jobs. And you guys are coming out of college saying, well, hey, I've worked hard and now I'm ready for it. What do you think is going to happen? He goes, well, I think you guys are going to get fired. So he had already decided what was going to happen. But I'd like to know what you think about I think there are a lot of us who study demographics who believe that our country was going to be in big trouble going forward as this big wave of boomers steps out of the spending peak of their lifetimes and there's no one behind them. Do I understand you to say that if we were to allow more immigration that we might be able to not go the way of Japan?
Absolutely.
That's the answer.
But don't underestimate boomer consumer spending power. 41% of Apple's products are purchased by whom? Boomers. So,
Okay,
in fact, millennials have no money. Boomers do. Seriously. Right. They do. So, I mean, so what's happening to millennials? They grew up in a boom period, but they matured in a what? Recession. You graduated from college with lots of debt and a bleak employment market, but they're highly entrepreneurial. And I think that there's some hope in that. You probably see it in your incubator. Yep. That's the thing, I think. I was told that was the last question, and I do what I'm told.